Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 51 in the series. I'm calling this one Beekeepers and Walking Wheels, and I'm hoping that'll become very clear in a short minute here. But first, some introductory stuff. It's lovely to see you if you are returning, and it is my pleasure to welcome you if you are brand new to the podcast. I am coming to you from Urbana, Illinois, where I'm a professor at the university there. I teach in the English department. And what else did I tell you about me? You can find me. Where you can find me, just about everywhere is Knitting the Stash. On Instagram, and obviously on YouTube, on Ravelry, and on the blog, which is knittingthestash.wordpress.com. I am sitting here on a beautiful Sunday morning. It has just started snowing outside. I'm looking out the window. And I also have, aside from the snow, I have a little free library that my husband built for my birthday this past year. And so when I sit here and cast and talk to you guys, I get to look out the window and see people of all ages just stopping at our little library and either putting books in or kind of looking to see what's new and taking things with them. And it's always really just fun to watch them stop. So I enjoy that as part of my podcasting morning. It's lovely to see you all, and I'm really happy to have some time to sit down and spend with you. In this episode, I do have a finished Beekeeper Cardigan, and we'll go to the past for that one because I already shipped it off to Wool and Honey, the yarn shop up in Michigan. It was a sample, and I talked about it on the last cast, but it is finished, and I'll show you all the little bells and whistles about that as we go along here. I have another book in our book series about the rare and hard to find and really cool books out there about spinning and knitting. We've been doing a bunch on knitting, so today I have one on spinning. Let's see, what else do I have? I have shearing day happened last weekend, so I went over to Kathy's farm and we did some shearing, so I've got some photos and some video for you for that. And what else do we have? We have a giveaway announcement, and I have a call for test knitters. So if you're interested in test knitting for me, please just hang on until the end of the cast and I will tell you all about it. Let's jump in with the Beekeeper Cardigan, shall we? I'll send you to the past and you can see my finished object, and then we'll come back and talk about shearing and all the other fun stuff. All right, see you in a minute. Hello from the past. I'm here to talk about the Beekeeper Cardigan by Marie Green of Olive Knits. And I spoke about this as a work in progress in episode 50. So if you want to see the sweater kind of half done, and hear a few of the interesting construction things going on there, head back to episode 50. Today it's all finished, and I just wanted to show it to you and give you a little run through of some of the interesting things about this pattern now that it's finished. But first let me show you, it's a little beat up from being in my bag, but this is the pattern and the pattern photo. And I like her photo a lot of this sweater, so I wanted to show it to you guys. And Marie Green has some beautiful patterns up on Ravelry. There's actually a lot of stuff going on up there. And she has a new book out that I think last time I checked was #1 on Amazon, so I'm guessing you guys know about it. But if you don't, head over to Amazon, look up Marie Green, and you will find her new book, which is, I think, Top-Down Sweaters in 2 weeks, something like that. It's a really cool book. So this is the Beekeeper Cardigan, and it is finished. It's a size 40, so it looks, it doesn't quite fit my mannequin model as well as it usually does. My mannequin model is I think it's about a 34. So the nice thing about seeing it on a 34 is that you can see the kind of ease and the way that it would fit you if you were a smaller size and you wanted to make a bigger size. This cardigan is intended to be worn with, I think, 4 inches of positive ease. So this is a size 40 bust, but it's actually a 44 if you were to measure it out. That's how I blocked it as well. I think the cool thing about this sweater is that when you're knitting it, if you look back at episode 50, it is like scrunched up. It is like puffy sleeves. It looks like, I don't know, it looks like something straight out of like Victoriana, just kind of like very puffy and kind of like, I don't know, stiff looking or something. But the minute you wash it, all those bees kind of like relax into their little hive of sweaterness, and they seem pretty happy. So it's an all over texture pattern, which I showed you last time, and I'll just spin her around so you can see. The only place that there isn't texture is up in the very top of the yoke here. and then where the ribbing is. Everywhere else has really this amazing bee pattern. And one thing I didn't talk about last time is the bees start here, and you're still doing all of your increases for your sleeves and for your upper yoke. So you are doing a little bit of funny business to figure out where the next bee comes in. Marie gives you, I think she gives you the first 12 rounds basically. And then after that, she's like, continue in pattern. So you have to, you know, use a little ingenuity, use a little of your knitter know-how to recognize when the next bee would happen. And they are offset. So I said it's a 12-row pattern because each row of bees is a 6-round row repeat. And then you get to the next set of bees and they're offset from the first ones. So you're constantly kind of figuring out if you need a new bee. And then once you get past the increases, then you're doing your bees all the way under the arm. You kind of figure out where they start, and then you're just continuing them all the way down the body. Same thing goes on with the sleeves. You're, like I said last time, I knit my sleeves flat to maintain my gauge. So you can see here's the seam for you, for those of you who want to see it. Seam that runs this way from the cuff to the armpit, and I did it in a nice mattress stitch. And I think it's one thing that's cool about doing it flat is that the bees actually, I was wondering how the bees would line up, but the bees actually, it looks like a complete good bee lineup, even though these were knit in the flat and then seamed. So I'm pretty happy with that. Construction wise, once you knit the body, it's a pretty simple sweater in terms of construction because you're coming down top down, you divide for the sleeves, and then you finish the body. Go back, finish the sleeves, and then you work on this beautiful neckline. And remember in episode 50, you got to see that the sweater was kind of really a little bit, it looked like very angular up there and kind of definitely unfinished looking. And I promised that this collar would kind of bring everything together and help it sit on your shoulders without needing it to be buttoned. And voila, Marie Green doesn't fail, doesn't disappoint. I grabbed my stitches as she recommended all the way around and knit up the collar, and it just sits perfectly. I'll put in some pictures here of me wearing it. Even though it's going to be big on me, you can at least see how it sits. And it sits just like this cardigan sits. I mean, it doesn't need buttons because it just sits so nicely on the neck and shoulders. So that's really cool. It's a nice feature. And then the last thing you do is are these bands down the front, and they're not button bands because there's no buttons. Now I have seen folks on their project pages, you know, they have like a shawl pin that they'll put on there and close it. You could add buttons. I think there were a couple projects up there where they added buttons, and you could totally easily do that. But I swear, Marie Green's neckline will hug your neck, and it isn't the kind of sweater that's gonna like fall open all the time and you're not gonna be tugging at it. It really just sits really nicely. So if I had to give a couple pieces of advice about this cardigan, especially for new knitters, if you're at the beginner, intermediate level, you've never really knit a garment before or something like that, I think this garment is totally doable for you, construction-wise. But there are two things I'd mention. One is you're gonna be on your own for a lot of the bee placement. And that might sound a little scary, but it's not really. Marie Green gives you a lot of support. She has a web page devoted to this sweater, where there's tons of information about like, oh my god, I missed a bee, where do the bees go, I don't have a chart, I need a chart. Like all those kinds of things are up on the webpage. So she's super helpful in that regard. And I don't think, once you get the hang of the bees, once you get a sense of like where they're supposed to go and you kind of go with the bee flow, you'll be fine. The other thing is that Marie's pattern is a little bit old-fashioned, and what I mean is that she doesn't include a chart. There is a chart on the webpage, a sample chart. So it's all written out instructions. And for all of these bands, the collar and these front bands, she doesn't give you stitch counts for how many stitches to pick up. She's assuming that you're versed well enough in button bands and that kind of thing to be able to figure it out a little bit. So what she'll tell you is pick up so many stitches over so many stitches. So for example, pick up, 7 out of every 8 stitches on your way up. And you want to end with a multiple of X plus 2 so that you have the right amount for the ribbing. So that's a little tricky. For a new knitter, I think that would be a little bit confusing to try to figure out what to do, and you'd probably have to rip it out a couple times. But that's okay. It's all a learning process, and I think it's a really great pattern in that it does offer you that skill. By doing these button bands, these bands, the way that she's recommending that you do them, you're forced to kind of think about how many stitches you're picking up and why that would matter. So for example, if you picked up too many stitches, you'd have a collar that kind of, or a band in front that kind of flared out instead of sitting nice and flat. So you'll learn a lot from this pattern, I think, and it's really useful in those regards. So that's all I want to say about the Beekeeper cardigan. This is getting shipped off to Melissa and Liz of Wool and Honey, which is a wonderful yarn shop up in Michigan, and if you're lucky enough to live close to them, you should visit, and visit often. I guess Marie Green is coming to visit them in February, so if you have a chance to get up there then, that's even better. You get to meet Marie, see this sample, and probably a lot of other samples of her work, and pick up a copy of her new book. And I wish I could be there. So I'll send you back to the future now, and catch up with you later. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing the Beekeeper cardigan all finished up. I do love the color that they chose for that sweater, and a lot of people have complimented the color choice, and I had nothing to do with it, sadly. It's a beautiful color, and I think it came out really nicely. It actually did have some nice stitch definition. I feel like there must be some long wool in that wool mix, because it really has some luster to it and some really nice stitch definition. But it was a fun knit, and I'm also glad that it's finished, because it was kind of a little bit of a rush at the end to get it done. Sometimes sample knitting is that way. And if you are a sample knitter or a test knitter, please head on over to the Ravelry group and tell us about your experiences, because we've got a thread up there running about sample and test knitting. I know a lot of you are interested in either getting involved or trying to figure out how to get involved. And we have a whole group of people here who have done some sample and test knitting, and they'd be happy to answer your questions. So head over to that thread if you want to get some more information. So onward to some shearing stories for you. Kathy of Seven Sisters Farms hosted a few of us for the annual shearing. And this year it happened a little bit early, because there are a couple farms in our guild. There's Christy Pyatt, who runs Fox Run Farms, and there's Kathy, who runs Seven Sister Farms. And both of them, by the way, combined some fleece for me for the yarn that is coming at the end of February, so keep yourselves ready for that one. But this year's shearing had to be a little early, because Christy had a couple of her ewes artificially inseminated, and they were gonna lamb earlier than would be normal. So the artificial insemination took, which is good, but that meant that the shearing had to happen early, which means if you're going to bring a shearer out, you might as well have them do both farms at once. So that's why Kathy's shearing happened at the same time as Christy's shearing. It was a pretty cold day. It was after the polar vortex, thankfully, but just like 2 days after the polar vortex. So I think it was like a high of 25 degrees. We were all bundled up, you know, everybody had their coveralls on, or their down coats, or their, you know, their mittens and their 10 hats. And we were inside the barn, so that was good at least. And Jim came out, he's been the shearer for many years now, and sheared all 17 of her sheep. And this, oftentimes I'm at the shearing table when we do shearing. I mean at the skirting table when we do shearing. Kind of like taking the first run at the fleece, we roll them out on the skirting table, kind of take off all the tags and goo and whatnot around the fleece, and then wrap them up in sheets and kind of set them aside for a more proper skirting later. But this year I was not on the skirting team. I was on the belly wool and actual shearing team. So a couple of folks were back with the sheep, including Beth, kind of sheep wrangling, and I got there a little bit early and we pulled off all the jackets. So all of Kathy's sheep are jacketed, and so we had to get all the jackets off of them, which, you know, these are big animals. We were kind of like working to pin them in different corners and get the straps off the back of their feet and then pull the jackets off their heads. So once that was all done and they were separated out, we separated out the ram from the white ewes and the colored ewes, and then I was in charge of helping to gather up the belly wool as the shearer is shearing, and pulling off as much kind of muck as I could. Like if I could, I would pull off the leg wool and the belly wool and get that out of the mix and kind of keep the plywood where the sheep were being shorn clear of as much debris as possible, because any kind of debris or cruddy stuff that's on that platform will get into the fleece, and since the fleece were jacketed, they were all really pretty pristine, so we didn't want any crap getting into them. So that was kind of my job, was to keep the area clean, to mark down any health things, and to look for to see if any of the ewes were pregnant, who were supposed to be pregnant. So it was good. We had pregnant ewes who were supposed to be pregnant, and no ewes who were not supposed to be pregnant were pregnant. So it was good. Anyway, that didn't make a lot of sense. But we had a good time. Kathy made a delicious lunch for afterwards, and we all got to sit around inside in the warm, having washed our hands, and got to eat some delicious food. So it was a good day, and I'm gonna I will have put in some photos here as I was talking so that you could see what was going on. But if you're interested in seeing an actual part of the shearing, I'll put some of that video in at the end so you can kind of watch Jim work on the sheep. It's a pretty impressive thing to see if you haven't seen it before. And so shearing happened, and that wool is going to be sent off. I believe that Kathy's going to send it off to a mill here in Illinois, and I may have some of it for you guys if you're interested in getting a hold of some of her yarn. She has mostly Corriedale. She has one fin, a couple of Teeswater crosses, beautiful fleece, and in fact the ram Merlin had the biggest fleece of all. His was a 25-pound fleece, and Debbie brought it back to our little gathering, and we got to skirt it and kind of separate it out, and it was a massive fleece. I mean, it took up the whole floor, and 25 pounds of fleece is just probably too much for any one person. So they kind of split it between, I think Debbie took some, Beth took some, and then Kathy was going to keep some of it. So it was pretty impressive. But if you're interested in getting some of that yarn, I think I'll be able to offer it through the podcast a little bit later. And as I said, I have my yarn from the last shearing, and it is pretty much ready to go. I'll give you a little teaser here. This is the yarn. It is an 80% Cormo, 20% Corriedale cross, spun 3-ply in a DK weight, and I am sorting through it right now, and I'm putting together some patterns with in collaboration with Albina of LB Hand Knits. So we're gonna have a cowl pattern and a hat pattern that will be in you could get as a kit with this yarn, which means you'd be able to take your one beautiful skein of yarn and make something really cool with it. So all of that is on the horizon. It's not quite available yet, but I do need some test knitters for the hat. So if you're interested in test knitting a hat, it's a 1 skein hat, DK weight yarn, give me a shout out. Send me an email at knittingthestash@gmail.com and send me your a link to your Ravelry page. And I'd love to get maybe 3 test knitters out of the crew to test knit this hat pattern. It would need to be finished by the end of February, so it's a quick turnaround, but I know you guys could do it. So here's my call. Test knitters, please let me know if you're interested in test knitting for the kits that will be coming out with the new yarn, which I'm so excited to actually introduce to you guys very, very soon. Onward to our next book in the rare, hard to find, and maybe out of print book series. So in the last few podcasts, I've shared knitting books. So this time around, I wanted to share a spinning book with you guys. And I picked up this spinning book at an estate sale of one of our guild members who passed away in the last couple of years, and didn't really know much about what I was picking up. I just saw it and thought it was really interesting, and so I have for you The Legacy of the Great Wheel by Katie Turner. And I looked this one up in preparation for the podcast, and this edition was published in 1980. I think it might have been the first edition of the book. But you can get copies on Amazon. It's pretty expensive. A used copy, I think, runs you around $50. So I thought I would tell you about the book in case it's of interest to you, and then you can decide if you want to invest the money in this particular book. So The Legacy of the Great Wheel by Katie Turner, or her full name is Catherine Turner, in case you're interested. She pretty much started weaving when she was about a teenager or something like that. And she was actually, she earned one of the first certificates of excellence issued by the Hand Weavers Guild of America in 1976. So that's about 4 years before this book was published. And she's shown her work in a bunch of different galleries. She was teaching in Oregon and around the country. So she was a pretty knowledgeable lady when it comes to spinning. And there are a bunch of cool things about this book. Let me give you a basic sense of table of contents. So it goes through history and myths of the Great Wheel, traditions, and then like an art of how to spin on the great wheel, and then tons of other information about basic things about spinning in terms of flax, silk, cotton, wool, how to scour fleece, all that kind of good stuff. She also has a glossary in here of terms and tons of great pictures. So here is a great wheel, if you guys have never seen one. They're massive spinning wheels, and they're also called walking wheels, which is why I called this episode Beekeepers and Walking Wheels. I happen to have one downstairs because my guildmates, Beth and Kathy, had an extra one that they couldn't fit in either of their houses because they both have walking wheels already, and Debbie has a walking wheel already. So I was the recipient of this walking wheel, and I'll put some photos and a little bit of video in here so that you can see the actual walking wheel. And one of the cool things you'll notice is that the head of the walking wheel, the which part is it called? The mother ball and the accelerating pulley and the spindle portion are actually held on with some corn husks that I soaked and kind of like pulled apart and then braided together and used to tie everything on. And this was something Debbie taught me. I had no idea about this technique, but you could use leather, but you could also use these corn husks, and it just seemed like a very cool traditional way to do it. So that's what my mother of all is kind of tied on with, are these corn husks. So great wheels, and for scale, you'll see in the video, I've got my little Ashford traditional kind of sitting next to it so that you can see just how big the walking wheel is. Now, walking wheels were in use for a long time, I think up until the 1920s or something like that, and they've kind of fallen out of prominence, and they're often hard to find, or if you find them in antique shops, they're not in the best shape. But if you can get your hands on one, or be gifted one by your guildmates, you can have some fun playing around with learning how to spin on a walking wheel. So in here, I'm going to show you a couple of the myth chapters is interesting, but the traditions the traditions chapter is pretty terrific. She talks a lot about the difference between wool wheel, flax wheel, and a wool wheel was a great wheel, whereas a flax wheel you'd spin flax on. And she talks about the the old kind of like yarn that they used to walk 20 miles a day spinning at that wheel for a few skeins of yarn. And she kind of like does the math, and she's like, well, to spin that much yarn, it would take actually 29 hours, which is longer than a day, but anyway. She's like, you get the sense that it takes that long to make a skein of yarn with a walking wheel because you are walking. You're turning the wheel, and you're kind of walking backwards with the fiber in your left hand, kind of like drafting it out. And then you're spinning it again to get more twists, and you're kind of continuing to draft out. And then when you want to wind it onto the spindle, you pull your yarn, instead of being out at an angle, you pull it more parallel with the wheel, you spin it again, and it pulls itself onto the spindle. So that's how you work a walking wheel, which means you're walking backwards and forwards the whole time that you're using this wheel. So you're constantly in motion. So I thought that was it's pretty fun to think about 20 miles a day. I can imagine some women trying to get up to that, probably getting up to that amount. And then she has a really interesting bit in here about why walking wheels have a left-hand draw. There aren't any walking wheels that have a right-hand draw or draft for the fiber. And she thinks that's partially because of machines, and partially because you need to be a little bit more coordinated with your right hand, and partially because a lot of us who spin are ambidextrous in one way or the other. And it's just something that you kind of learn coordination-wise. I'm right-handed, but I draft with my left hand, and I've heard of that with a lot of different spinners. And I know that some spinners who are left-handed draft with their right hand, so it's some pretty interesting stuff going on there. She has some great info about flax and picking and carding in here. So if you're thinking about how much this book is actually going to tell you about great wheels, it's pretty much the first 2 chapters have the most historical information in them, and then, you know, a bunch of these really great pictures of women working on great walking wheels in the 80s and 70s. So it's not a book that deals so much with the history. There are others probably that would deal more with the history, but the glossary is pretty interesting. And the other thing that's pretty awesome is her bibliography, which I'd like to try to find a way to post for everyone who's interested. Her bibliography of books about wool and spinning, and then she has a Smithsonian Institute bibliography of spinning wheels, which is also really useful information if you're looking to try to learn more about the history of great wheels and spinning wheels in general. So there's the legacy of the great wheel, maybe of interest to a few of you, and a pretty interesting find for me to think about in terms of finding it at that estate sale. And I really have enjoyed. I love books. I'm a professor. I've told you this before, but I'm one of those people that could spend like an hour or 2 or 3 or, oh wait, let me just say it, the whole day in a bookstore or a used bookstore especially. So when there are estate sales and there are books, I'm usually like, there might be yarn and I'm kind of like, yeah, yarn is cool. Look at the books. So I'm always the one over there kind of like going through the books and, you know, walking away with like a massive armful of them, especially if they're at a discount. So this is how I find most of my books. It takes a lot of time and you don't often get what you actually want until you don't know that you actually get the things that you want until later, but it's a really fun way to go through the world, I suppose. And as an aside, we talked about Knitting Languages, which is a book that helps translate patterns that aren't in English, if English is your native language, into English. And Jantine mentioned on the comments to the last video that Skeindir Knits is actually hosting a CAL right now for anyone who wants to knit a pattern that's not in their native language. So if you're interested in getting involved in a CAL like that and you got your interest piqued by the Knitting Languages book last time, head on over to Skeindir Knits and see what they're up to for their CAL. I think it sounds pretty awesome. So last but certainly not least is the giveaway. We have a giveaway from Yarn Fairy and the Pixies, thankfully, and Yarn Fairy and the Pixies sent me a bunch of different skeins of yarn to kind of test out and give away, and this is business card. They are running a Fairy Tale M CAL, it looks like, which looks pretty neat. Might be of interest to some of you guys. And they sent along this beautiful bamboo sock yarn. In fact, they sent 2 skeins of it. So this is 80/20 bamboo superwash merino in this beautiful colorway. The camera's picking it up pretty well. 460 yards for 100 grams, and it is really soft and beautiful, and you can see the drape to this. And I have 2 skeins of it, and I was going to give away both of them to 2 different people. So let me tell you who won. Let me pull up my numbers here. The winners were Shannon Keller and Joy Biggert. So congratulations, Shannon and Joy. If you want to send me an email at knittingthestash@gmail.com, we can get you in touch so I can get your address and send you this beautiful yarn. This one's a little crinkly because it's in a beautiful little package. So 2 skeins of yarn, 1 for Sharon, and 1 for Joy. So congratulations, you guys, and thank you so much to Yarn Fairy and the Pixies for sponsoring this giveaway. I hope you all enjoyed going to check out their website and all their beautiful colorways. I heard a lot of effusive commentary in the Ravelry thread and on the YouTube comment section and over on the blog. So thanks so much for participating. And if you didn't win this time, there will always be more giveaways. we host a lot of them on here. I hope everyone is well and that you have a great weekend in store. The snow outside is kind of piling up. I'm kind of hopeful that we'll get a couple inches. I do like snow. If it's going to be cold, it might as well snow, right? So I will see you guys in a couple of weeks. And until then, I hope you have a great time and enjoy some knitting and spinning of your own. Take care. See you later.